It's been a rough month for Canada's auto industry. General Motors announced in November plans to shut down its Oshawa plant by the end of 2019. And now Canada's diplomatic spat with China is adding some more headaches. The CBC's Katie Simpson is here to explain. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. So what are the new headaches?
What we understand, we spoke with a man named Flavio Volpe, who's the president of the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association. And he has spent more than 2 years trying to bring Chinese investment into Canada. He sees there are very limited paths to growth for Canada's auto sector, and one of those paths is through China, bringing Chinese investment here through their very large auto parts manufacturers. But Mr. Volpe says that he's been trying to, again, over the last 2.5 years, bring that investment here. But since Canada arrested Huawei CFO, he says there has been a significant chill in his relationship with these partners that he's trying to bring here to Canada, to bring investment dollars and jobs here to Canada. And he says it is very directly linked to what's happened. Have a listen to what he said.
Since the Huawei incident last week, everything's been chilled. And they've explicitly brought that up and have changed the discussion to, instead of immediate term, they're talking about, well, let's settle this first, let's settle the uncertainty first, and we might be a couple of years out.
So he can't say the specific names of the companies, he said, due to confidentiality of the negotiations and what's going on behind the scenes. But he says it's multiple manufacturers. He said the investments would be in at least $1 billion, if not $1.5 billion. And given what's gone on with GM, when I was speaking with him, he was saying that, given that sort of problem in Oshawa and the loss of jobs there, this is something that the industry is looking for investors to come in to start those purchases again. So all of the spin-off companies that supplied parts to that Oshawa plant, they need investment so they can keep their doors open. So there's some frustration, certainly among people that Mr. Volpe represents with the Auto Parts Association, but he's very concerned that this diplomatic issue is going to have long-term consequences, and as he just said, it could end up postponing significant investments that could help that industry.
What about the potential for long-term consequences in other industries?
That is something we spoke with a prof at the University of Toronto about. Her name is Lynette Ong. She says that even if there isn't any sort of direct boycott, China could do what's known as a sentiment ban. It's nothing official, but if people in China are encouraged not to buy products that are Canadian, there could be some sort of significant ripple effect on Canadian businesses. She says, though, she doesn't think we're through the worst of it at this point. She thinks that tensions between China and Canada are going to get worse leading up to Meng Wanzhou's first court date, but she does think it is somewhat positive that China finally did grant consular access to the 2 Canadians that were detained in the past 2 weeks. And she's encouraging Canadian businesses to lay low, don't do anything dramatic at this point, and not to panic. She says there's one big sign everyone should look for, and that's when you should panic. Have a listen.
I think if the Chinese authorities will to arrest a 3rd Canadian, then I will start to panic. Until that happened, I don't see that happening because they have already granted consular access to the 2 Canadian business, the 2 Canadians being arrested in China. I think this is a good sign that it's a goodwill on their part that they are probably willing to negotiate.
So getting that access, she thinks, is a very big sign from Chinese authorities. But at the same time, if there is some sort of significant development, if we learn of another Canadian that's been arrested, she says that's when everyone should start to panic.
All right. Thank you, Katie. The CBC's Katie Simpson. Canada's arrest of a Huawei executive this month has put the company under renewed scrutiny. For years, some Western nations have raised concerns about the Chinese tech firm, arguing its technology could pose a risk to national security. But here in Canada, there are also concerns about how the company is operating within Canadian universities. Jim Hinton is a fellow with the Centre for International Governance and Innovation and an intellectual property lawyer at Own Innovation. He joins me now from Waterloo, Ontario. Hi, Mr. Hinton. Nice to see you. Thanks for your time.
Yes, thank you.
What can you tell me about Huawei, and how it's operating in Canada from your perspective?
Yeah, so what we found is that Huawei has partnered with about a dozen Canadian universities. And essentially what they do is they work with the universities, the researchers and professors, and they get to keep and own the intellectual property that's being generated.
And why is that a concern?
Yeah, so the big issue is that Huawei is probably what has been considered China's has the best patent portfolio of any Chinese company. So the issue is that Canadian universities, which get 90% of their funding from the Canadian taxpayer, are subsidizing the IP generation of a foreign technology champion.
And do other companies do this? Is it just Huawei, or are there other examples of that?
Yeah, well, we see this across the board, and predominantly it's been with American technology companies. And so our research has found that 2/3 of industry intellectual property ends up in foreign hands. And so we're subsidizing the IP generation of these foreign technology companies. And this intellectual property is being used and can be used against Canadian companies.
Is is there a role for the federal government? How do you sort of address that from where you sit? What is the best way to address that?
Yeah, there's a lot of policy levers that we can pull, and I think that the important thing is refocusing on what we mean for successful Canadian innovation. And so creating research is what the policy has been up until now, and that's a science and technology play. That's not an innovation play. And so to truly be successful in innovation economy, you need to own the intellectual property when it's commercialized. Just creating the ideas and then giving it to a foreign technology company is not success. Even getting pennies on the dollar to subsidize some of your research is not an innovation success.
Let me ask you more broadly about Huawei, because of course, as you can understand, over the past few weeks, we've heard a lot about specifically national security concerns around Huawei. Several countries we know have banned the use of its technology in 5G networks, including the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Canada has not done that yet. Do you think that should concern Canadians?
Well, I think what is really of concern is that we're Canada's sort of being caught in the middle, and the Americans are using our adherence to law and order and treaties for extradition to possibly benefit, and we should question whether they're doing that to benefit their own domestic champions, or is it in Canada's best interest. And so I think Canada's sort of promising itself to be with China and be with the Americans at the same time, and there's nothing left on the table for us to eat.
Should Canadians be concerned, though, about the implications of, for example, the 5G network? And I'm asking just insofar as, we've seen sort of a number of articles lately sort of, again, drilling down in what prompted all of this in the beginning and the concerns that the Americans have expressed and some of our other allies. Do you think those security concerns, I guess, are legitimate?
Yeah, well, I think the security concerns are very important, and so the access to the infrastructure and the data that flows over that infrastructure is of utmost importance in a data-driven economy. And so if we can't ensure that those lines of communication are secure, then we've got an issue. But I think we don't even know what we're dealing with. We don't have the sophistication to understand whether or not that's true, and we're sort of leaving it to the economic forces outside of the country to dictate that.
Why don't we have the ability to figure out if that's true or not?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's the scrutiny level that's been put on the infrastructure or not. What I do know is that a lot of the 5G technology has probably been developed at Canadian universities, and now it's being used and sold back to us for us as consumers.
Why do you think that that's not, that most Canadians probably wouldn't realize that? How commonplace is it?
Yeah, I think I think the real issue is that intellectual property and patents are a negative right, and so whether or not a technology company like Huawei owns and implements the technology of 5G, because the patents are embedded in the 5G standard, they are a licensee and they will be able to get royalties on this technology sort of worldwide, whether or not it's in the device that they sold. And so there's a lot of complicated and sort of technical policy measures and intellectual property and standards and security questions that need to be answered, and I haven't seen that discourse.
So if you were to counsel Canada's approach, the federal government's approach to Huawei, both as a telecoms provider and a partner with universities, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I think that we've got to really refocus and bring in the Canadian innovators and our domestic technology champions and help them shape the policy levers and discussion around this. So really, the fact that a large company like Huawei is in our universities that means that Canadian technology companies that are trying to scale are not having the same opportunity and access to university and researchers.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Hinton.
Yes, thank you.